Welcome. My name's Keith Brandt. I'm the Vice Chancellor for University Relations with UC Santa Cruz, and we welcome you to our first Friday Forum, we're calling these. And our goal here is to actually bring you topical issues, topics that are interest to both you and the university. And our format is much of what we have today, where you'll be hearing a little bit perspective from the university, as well as making great use of this fabulous faculty we have up on the Hill who do incredible research that you can benefit from and affect all of our lives. So we're very happy to see you turn out today. By the way, we welcome your thoughts about topics. If you have ideas, talk to me or anybody in the room. We're welcome to hear you. And we have invited sort of community leaders, business leaders, distinguished alumni, elected officials, but you're always welcome to bring a friend, and we plan to grow out into bigger rooms if the audience grows too. So I want to give you, tell you about two upcoming events you might be interested in as well. So we have our annual Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation, where we're going to welcome Ben Jealous, who's the past president of the NAACP and whose family lives in Monterey County. That is Thursday, February 9th at 7 p.m. in the Civic Auditorium. Also coming up in late February, we'll be sponsoring our 4th annual Climate Conference featuring the Fred Keeley Lecture on Environmental Policy, Climate Change, Science, and Policy in a Trump Administration Era. Seems like a theme, huh? Two alumni and two faculty will make up our panel. Ken Alex, Senior Policy Advisor to Jerry Brown, Director of the Office of Planning and Research, and John Laird, who's the Secretary of California Natural Resources Agency. And then two of our faculty, Miriam Greenberg from Sociology and Erica Zavaleta from Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. It should be a really interesting topic. That is Saturday, February 25th at 7 p.m. on campus. So hope you can join us for those topics. So today we have what is perhaps an incredibly timely topic on citizenship and migration. It's almost the topic where you want to have one eye on the speaker and one eye on your Twitter feed, seeing what's happening in Washington as policy is made instantaneously. Our format is we're going to have about 35 minutes of remarks, and then we're going to try to reserve 15 minutes for Q&A and be done at 9:30 on the dot. Part of this topic is really also a focus on our students on campus, and I thought there's often misperceptions of our current student body that I thought I'd give you a picture of our students today. First of all, our students at UC Santa Cruz really look like California. At least 28% of them are Latino, and I say at least because 9% are multi-race, multi-ethnicity, which is a fast-growing category. And only about 34% currently identify as Caucasian, so you have a very diverse population. Almost 40% are considered low income, and that's families coming from households of earnings of $50,000 or less, roughly. And these are, if you think about that, $50,000 to support a family of 4, 5, 6 plus in California, very challenging. Most of these students, and actually more students than that, even pay no tuition to go to University of California, although they are still saddled, obviously, with housing and living expenses and books and all the other things that one has to pay for to live, so they're very strapped. Our enrollment on campus, it nears 18,000 currently, and about 10% of those are graduate students. We've grown this year really by mandate from the state of California and the university system. 92% of our undergraduates are California residents. So there's throughout the system there's a growing number of non-residents, but we're still 92% residents at Santa Cruz. We also house 53% of our undergraduates on campus, which is the highest percentage of students housed on campus in any public higher education institution in the state of California. So we have a real commitment to housing, and that's important, especially in this community where housing is such a crunch. So think of this picture: the most diverse ever, the most economically depressed ever, the most educationally prepared ever, and selective, and still are very much housed on campus in a community. So that's the picture of UC Santa Cruz today. And I set the stage for that as we talk about this very important group of of students that the Chancellor is going to mention in terms of our undocumented group. So let me ask the Chancellor to come up. George Blumenthal joined UC Santa Cruz in 1972. I know a lot of you know him, but as a professor of astronomy and astrophysics, after many years of distinguished teaching, research, and serving the campus and the UC system, George was appointed the 10th Chancellor in 2006. Now in his 11th year, he is currently the second longest serving Chancellor among the 10 UC campuses. Please welcome George Blumenthal.
Thank you, Keith, and thank all of you for coming this morning. I think this will be an interesting discussion that we all have. The topic today is on undocumented students, and we have more than 400 undocumented students at UC Santa Cruz today, one of the largest groups within the UC system. And in fact, we're the second highest number, second only to UCLA. And we are known for our support for those students, and our support remains steadfast, because this is a group of students who right now are, shall we say, concerned about their future. That's an understatement, because no one really knows exactly what's going to happen. I'll say a little bit more about that. But I want to just emphasize from the onset that we as a campus, and I as a chancellor, am steadfast in supporting these students, in making sure that they can remain here and get an education, and that we do everything we possibly can to support them, their families, and their communities as well. Because I think they're an important part of our campus, but I also think they're an important part of our future as a state. And, you know, I'm really proud that the entire UC system has gone out of its way to publicly support these students. And I might just add, this is also true of the community colleges, the community college system in California, as well as the CSU system. I think all of the three public higher education systems in California have stood together on this. Now, we issued a statement back in December after the election with regard to undocumented students, and we wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we will go out of our way to protect their privacy and their civil rights. So, for example, like all of the other UCs, we do have a police department, but our police department will not partner with other government agencies to enforce federal immigration law. That is not their job, and that is not what we expect them to do. We don't want them to contact or detain or arrest anyone on the basis of their immigration status. So we will continue, in addition, to admit undergraduate undocumented students. We will not release any information about those students to any agency without a warrant requiring us to do that. We, of course, will follow the law, but nevertheless, we are going to do everything we can to protect the privacy of those students, and we won't cooperate with any federal registry that's based on religion, national origin, race, sexual orientation, or any other such property or of an individual. And furthermore, our medical centers within the university will treat patients without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination with regard to their immigration status. But having said all of these things, I mean, we really want to be as supportive as we can of these students. There's no question that uncertainty is taking a toll on them. They don't know what lies ahead for them in the future. This first week of the Trump administration, we've seen some big changes already. Just this morning, I read various news services on the web. I saw two different articles. One article said that the Trump administration is going to put off taking any action on DACA, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is deferred action for undocumented students. And then I saw a second article that said that they've already prepared an executive order with regard to rescinding DACA. So none of us know, and as I said just this morning, I saw two opposing articles, or two articles coming to different conclusions on that subject. So it's very much uncertain times, and all we can do is provide support in these times. But it is, I want you to understand, for these students, it is extremely difficult. And so let me give a little bit of background on this. Some years ago, probably 12, 13, 14 years ago, the state legislature passed a bill called AB 540, which allowed undocumented students who fit certain criteria, primarily graduating from a California high school. It allowed them to attend the University of California and the CSU system, paying in-state rather than out-of-state tuition. Because normally you would not otherwise be able to qualify for in-state tuition if you weren't a U.S. resident. But AB 540 was a major step forward, roughly a dozen years ago in that regard, and it allowed many more students to attend the University of California. And then a couple of years ago came the California DREAM Act. Prior to the DREAM Act, it was one thing for students to be able to get into the university. It was another thing to even be able to get into the university paying in-state tuition. But we were barred by various regulations from offering financial aid to those students. And so I, along with the chancellor at Berkeley, he and I did a little tour of the regents and tried for some years to persuade the regents to adopt a policy, which we argued they could legally do, to extend financial aid to those students. We were not successful in that effort. However, California passed the California DREAM Act, which allows state and university funds to be used for financial aid. And that really was a game changer because that accomplished what we had hoped to do, and it was done through the legislative process. And so now our undocumented students do have state or university financial aid available to them. But that's still limited, and I just want to give you a sense of that. So that means that they qualify for aid, for example, from what the university retain. When the university collects tuition from students, we put aside a third, which we devote to financial aid. So we're allowed to use that for undocumented students. There's something called the California Student Aid Commission, which provides a lot of money to higher education in California, and those students now qualify for grants from Cal Grants from that commission. Those are all good things. But for federal purposes, the federal DREAM Act never passed. And that means that they do not qualify, these students do not qualify for Pell Grants, which normally are used to support the most, the poorest students, the students from families whose incomes are less than, I don't remember what the limit is, say $50,000 or $50,000 roughly. So they don't qualify for Pell Grants. They don't qualify for federal loans, student loans, and they don't qualify for federal work-study employment. So even though the California DREAM Act was a major game changer in a positive direction, it didn't make those students equivalent to California students from indigent populations, for example, from populations that were not of means. So it still involved considerable difficulty. We as a university have tried to make up for that. We've put together some work programs so that those students can work from different sources of funds. We've tried to find other funding to make up for Pell Grants. But I'm not going to suggest to you that we've fully made them equal to California students at this point, because I don't think we have. Nevertheless, we've tried to make it possible for them to attend the university, and I think that's an important thing to get done. But we have a lot of student services that we offer them as well. We offer them largely through the educational opportunity programs that we run. And we provide some really comprehensive support at a personal, academic, financial, and legal level as well. We have peer mentors, special academic advisors. I mentioned financial aid of various sorts. And we even provide some legal services on immigration. We provide those through both the Santa Cruz County Immigration Project in Watsonville, through the Santa Cruz Community Credit Union, and I think most importantly now there's a UC system program run through UC Davis Law School, which provides legal services to undocumented students. So should, in fact, there be a new executive order, we can find a way to provide legal representation for those students. And as you know, an undocumented person with legal representation is likely to fare much better than one without. So those all work, and we also have some donor-supported funds, which have very much helped undocumented students as well. We have a monthly newsletter, and we have various groups of students, like AB 540 group meetings. So there are support services out there. We offer workshops for DACA students. DACA, by the way, means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. A lot of students, in fact, probably most of our undocumented students qualify for DACA, which was an executive order from President Obama. Basically, what it did is allowed students to apply for status to be guaranteed that they could remain for 2 years at a time. They could renew it to be students. It allowed them to work while they were students, and it even provided opportunities for them to work after they graduated. So DACA went a long way by executive order toward making students have many of the same rights that California residents or U.S. residents do. And we've put on some workshops for them. Again, they can work while they're undocumented. We've provided avenues if they want to off-campus housing, to mental health support, to budgeting support, and to graduate school, because some of them go on to have very distinguished careers after they graduate from UCSC as undergraduates. And there's broad campus support. This is not, I would say that overwhelmingly everyone supports those students. We have, through Student Health Services, Disability Service, the Women's Center, the Registrar Career Center, Academic Excellence Program. All of those programs really do a lot to help students in those categories. But the bottom line is, right now, those students are scared. And I'll be honest with you, if I were one of those students, I'd be scared too. And I just came back from a Regents meeting. I was talking to some other chancellors, and I realized that it's even worse than that. My daughter is a UCLA medical school student in her 4th year of medical school, now applying for 4-year residencies, as all medical students must do after they graduate if they want to be real doctors. It was pointed out to me, and I hadn't appreciated this. Now the residency programs don't know what to do with undocumented students, because with DACA coming online, it's not clear whether they will be able to legally accept those students as residents, and therefore there is some considerable fear that for medical students who are undocumented, they will not be able to get a residency, because the various hospitals will be afraid to commit resources to a student who might be deported shortly. So this is just a really difficult situation, and that's just one example out of literally dozens where they're affected in ways that I might not have otherwise thought about. So we're just beginning to see what's going to happen within this administration. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I think there's one thing that we can be absolutely certain about, and that is the commitment of the campus to these undocumented students. And I might also add the commitment of the community. Santa Cruz as a community, Watsonville as a community, I think the whole county has been very supportive of these students and of undocumented individuals as well. So I think that, we live in a very supportive community in that regard. We share those values. And, there's a new UC system group to support these students, which was organized by President Napolitano. We have advocates at every level, whether it be in Santa Cruz, at the campus, in Oakland, in Sacramento. I think those are all pieces of good news. So I think that broad support will continue. I'm somewhat hopeful that that support will be meaningful, but nothing that we do is going to take away the fear and the concern that those students have, that their lives could change overnight. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you.
Remember, if you have a question for George, save it till the end. No, we're gonna come back to do questions. We want to zoom out a little now and look at this issue from a macro issue and a research perspective, and I'm happy to introduce Cathrine Ramirez, Associate Professor of Latin American and Latino Studies. Katherine is also the director of the Chicano Latino Research Center on campus. Her research and writing explore U.S. cultural history through the lenses of Mexican-American history and literature. She's the author of The Woman in the Zoot Suit, Gender, Nationalism, and the Culture Politics of Memory, and numerous essays on race, gender, and science fiction. Her current book project narrates a history of assimilation as a concept, policy, and practice in the United States. She has been recognized as an outstanding teacher at UC Santa Cruz. Please welcome Kat Ramirez.
Thank you, Keith, for that warm welcome. And thank you, Chancellor Blumenthal, for affirming your commitment to all students at UC Santa Cruz. Let me pull out my notes. And I usually set my phone, but I won't right now. Well, good morning, and thank you for being here. I want to start with a question that's related to the title of my presentation, Home and Mobility. And I think for many of us, Santa Cruz is home. It's beloved. However, it may not always have been our home. I, for example, was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I left home in the 1980s to attend the University of California at Berkeley. I ended up earning my bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees from Cal. And I was very fortunate to arrive here in 2001 with a postdoctoral fellowship from the Ford Foundation. I was hired at UCSC as an assistant professor in 2002. And I had my first child here in Santa Cruz at Sutter in 2003. And my kids attend Santa Cruz City Schools. I am a very proud Santa Cruzan now, but I am not from here originally, and this has become my home. And it's a place that's very dear to me. And so I just want to know where some of you are from. And if Santa Cruz is home, and it's been home for a long time, who came here before you? Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents? I don't know. I'm going to pick on you, George. Where are you from? I mean, you arrived in 72, but where did you come from?
Well, I came from a postdoc in Boston, but I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
I was born in Fresno. Unfortunately, my parents moved here when I was 4 years old.
Okay, great. So you're a local.
My family were Irish immigrants. Came here about 150 years ago. I've lived around this region since.
Wow. So you all are old Californians.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, relatively.
Yeah. Yeah. Relatively, in the scheme of things. Yes. Yes.
I was born in Iraq. I came here when I was 9, went to Ecuador, middle school and high school, and came back to UCSC in '89.
Well, welcome back. So many of us are from many places in the world. In my work as a scholar and as a teacher, as director of the Chicano Latino Research Center, I study the movement of people, and I emphasize that people move for many reasons, including education, opportunity, desperation, force, or curiosity. And I work with a very broad definition of mobility. And by mobility, I refer to the movement of people through space, so from one city to another, from Fresno to Santa Cruz, or across international borders, from Iraq to the US, to Ecuador, back to the United States. I also study mobility along the socioeconomic ladder. And we live in a moment in which there is a lot of concern about mobility. Some people are perceived as too mobile, and others are seen as not mobile enough. So the people designated migrants are seen by some as excessively mobile, while certain Americans, for example, those who have been left behind by our post-manufacturing, increasingly automating, and information and tech-based economy are seen as not mobile, not nimble enough. And while I recognize the power of individual will, what we call human agency, I draw attention to the social forces, for example, the laws, policies, and historical legacies that allow or force people to move or to remain home. And one of these forces is the US-Mexico border. This is a photo by the San Francisco photographer Richard Misrach. This is an actual part of the US-Mexico border. He took this photo near Los Indios, Texas in 2015. And for me, this photo drives home the point that borders are very much a fantasy. They're not natural or neutral. They have histories and they aren't permanent. So my family is from, before my family migrated to Los Angeles, my family came from Gadsden territory. So my family is from southern Arizona, and after the US-Mexico War, the US acquired what's known as the Mexican Cession. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo demarcated in 1848 what that territory would be. In 1853, the US came back and moved the border farther south. So it went from the Gila River south to what is now the Arizona-Sonora border. And so that includes Tucson, Arizona, Douglas, Arizona, Nogales, Arizona. That is my ancestral home. So borders have histories. They aren't permanent. They change. They also tell us that we're here and those people, are over there, even when some, millions of them, are in fact over here. Borders lie. They offer the illusion of stability and impermeability. Borders produce migrants too. More and more we hear that we live in a world or in a time of unprecedented migration. In 2015, the United Nations reported that the number of migrants, roughly 60 million, had reached a record high. The uptick shows no signs of slowing, and the world, it seems, is in crisis. However, what these dramatic numbers fail to take into account is population growth, and this is what demographers tell us. According to scholars at Oxford's International Migration Institute, only 2 to 3% of the human population has moved across international borders. So the number of people on the move hasn't grown as much as we think. What's grown is the number of people, period, the number of people in the world. People comprising the remaining 97% of the human population have stayed in the countries of their birth. And these figures have remained steady for the past 5 decades. So why the hype about migration? Why the demands for walls? Why is migration described as a crisis in need of management or a problem to be solved if the percentage of people moving across international lines hasn't changed for half a century? What, if anything, is distinctive about migration in our time? And this is a question that I pose to my students. So what's increased over the past 5-6 years is the number of refugees, particularly from Syria. Still, asylum seekers make up less than 10% of all migrants. Moreover, the vast majority of refugees, 86%, are hosted by developing countries, relatively poor countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Kenya, and Thailand, not wealthier northern or western nations. The origins and type of migrants have also changed. For centuries, Europe was a prominent source of emigration, out-migration. Scandinavians settled in the U.S.'s upper Midwest. My children's ancestors some of them went from Norway to Minnesota. Italians went to Argentina and Brazil. The Dutch landed in Indonesia and South Africa. Europeans, in short, left their homes in a process we can call migration or colonialism. Today, people from richer countries continue to traverse the globe for business, education, and leisure. So people continue to move. It's just that there's concern about the movement of certain people. We can contrast the figure of the tourist on the beach with his camera with that of the migrant emerging from the Mediterranean in an orange life vest. And this photo by the German photographer Jörg Brugmann is part of a series, Tourists versus Refugees. And Brugmann went to the island of Kos in the Aegean Sea and took photos of people taking photos. So today, it's the global South, people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America that's on the move. When the migrants are poor, or when they're different from their hosts or previous generations of migrants, cries that migration is out of control and must be halted grow louder and shriller. And we've seen this before. The Chinese Exclusion Act is one example, as is the warning that Muslim and Mexican migrants will have or already have had a damaging and indelible impact on Europe and the United States, respectively. So, like borders, the migrant is something of a fiction. When we talk about migration, we tend to talk about international migration, the movement of people from one country to another. Instead, I propose that we think about migration in broader terms, as a movement, quite simply, from one place to another. Many, perhaps most of us, are not from here. And by here, I mean Santa Cruz, California, USA. Many of us have moved from one city or state to another for school, work, necessity, or simply adventure's sake. Some of us travel every day, or we know people who travel every day. For example, they live in Santa Cruz and work in Silicon Valley. People who travel for work are known in migration studies and the media as economic migrants. And what I'm referring to right now is economic migrants of the more local sort, the people who live in one place but find work or more rewarding work in another place. So whether we're crossing international or more local lines, moving from, say, Somalia to Sweden, Madrid to Munich, or Stockton to San Francisco, people tend to move away from less wealth, less opportunity, and less stability toward, not surprisingly, more wealth, more opportunity, and more stability. And while some people are forced to move because of hunger, war, or a lack of jobs or affordable housing, others are unable to move. They're stuck. I want to wrap up right now by sharing some photos one of my students, Alma Villa, has taken as part of her senior thesis on forced displacement. Rather than looking at the exodus of Syrians, Iraqis, Rohingya from Burma, or Salvadorans, Alma, a combined major in Latin American and Latino studies and sociology, and a research apprentice at the Chicano Latino Research Center, is studying how the current affordable housing crisis is impacting low-income Latinos in Los Angeles. And with support from a number of awards. She's won the Weiss Family Scholarship, the STARS Reentry Scholarship. I can't keep track of all the awards she's won. She was able to travel to Los Angeles, that's where she's from, that's her home, and interview people about their housing situations, and she asked them the question, what is home to you? What do you consider home? And many of the people she interviewed had experienced quite a few evictions in their lives. She interviewed more than 45 people in English and Spanish, and these are just some of her interviewees. Here, the woman up here, this is Rosa. This is the interior of Rosa's apartment in Los Angeles. She's got decorations up from her daughter's quinceañera, her 15th birthday. This is an immigrant from Oaxaca by the name of Irma, and she has her own beauty parlor. She is a small business person, and her salon is in a big building with a bunch of, I don't know what you call them, puestos in Spanish. It's like a swap meet or a flea market. There are all these stands, yes. And so that's her beauty parlor. Her beauty parlor is one of the stands in this big building in Compton. And this one here, this is my favorite of these four. The title of that particular work is Un hogar no es una casa, or a home is not a house, or a house is not a home. I can't recall the exact title. But what I like about this photo is that Alma, or the interviewee, chose to sit next to this bouquet of flowers that's growing out of a repurposed toilet. So after conducting more than 45 in-depth interviews in English and Spanish, Alma has concluded that, not surprisingly, along with low wages, citizenship and non-citizenship status affect the housing conditions of low-income Latinos in Los Angeles, be they native-born U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, or undocumented immigrants. She found very little difference between those with U.S. citizenship and those without. In Alma's own words, and here I'm quoting from her thesis, despite having U.S. citizenship, if one is poor or if one's parents are both poor and undocumented, then one is still at risk of being displaced by rising housing costs. Families made up of both U.S. citizen and undocumented immigrants are known as mixed status families. And according to a report from the Nonpartisan Migration Policy Institute, 5.1 million children, so 5.1 million people under the age of 18 in this country, are living with an unauthorized immigrant parent. So Alma's work, her qualitative research, and figures like this one from the Migration Policy Institute bring into relief the complexity of migration and mobility. Yet, like refugees fleeing war and persecution, people move because it's the best or only option for them, whether they're traversing international spaces, commuting from one town to another, or changing apartments. They go where there's work, peace, opportunity, and a roof over their heads. Without disregarding some of the key differences among people who move, I encourage my students to expand how we think about migration and mobility. Once we reckon with the uneven distribution of wealth at both the global and local levels, we see that the world is in crisis not so much because of migration, but because of stark inequalities and violence, both at home and abroad. In short, migration is not the problem. Rather, it's a symptom of larger problems, such as lopsided economic development, a lack of affordable housing, political instability, and persecution, social forces, in other words. Those forces shape us, but with the right tools, such as education, sound policy, and here I will add, open minds and hearts, we can shape them too. So thank you for your time and attention.